So it was last February. My wife has this line that she likes to say. Sometimes it's encouraging, sometimes it's just makes things more scary, but she'll say, just make it an adventure. Just make it an adventure. And if you know my wife, you know that her definition of adventure and the average human's definition of adventure are two entirely different things. But in this case, it was reasonable. It was February, and I don't know if you remember last February, but it was brutal. Remember, it was like 35 degrees on the Saturday before the Super Bowl, and then winter hit with a vengeance. It was a winter a lot like this winter where it like wasn't there, and then bam. And I think, I need to go back and check this. Well, I guess I'm not, because if I was gonna, I would have done it this week. But I think there was only one Sunday last February that the high got above zero. It felt like it snowed a foot every day. This is all just prepare Tommy and Ashley for what is still to come. But anyway, it was a Saturday. I was packing my bag because the next day I was scheduled to fly out to Portland after morning gatherings. I had to be in class on Monday, and it was a quick trip. I was coming back on Tuesday. But of course, it was winter conditions, and it was snowing, and I'm a catastrophizer, anxiety, weirdo, fraidy cat, and so I'm already going like, I'm going to spend the whole week in Salt Lake City because I'm going to get stuck there. And then at one point, because this is what you do, I checked the weather in Portland, which is where I was going, and they were about to get blasted with a storm. I mean, relative to Portland, it was all kinds of drama and scary and the potential of shutting down PDX, the airport, and roads and all that different stuff. And so first thing I did is I called my friend John, because John lives in Portland. I actually graduated from the seminary with him. He now works at the grad school, which is the campus that I go to. And when I go out, I stay with John. And I called John. I was like, dude, do I even get on the stinking plane? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, the weather. He's like, the weather's great. I said, have you looked at the forecast? And he did this like, I don't know if they were sitting in front of a computer or what, but he's like, oh yeah, that's bad. And he proceeded to tell me, like, he's seen people in Portland with slush on the ground just park their car on the side of the road and start walking on the interstate. So he's not necessarily helping because he's saying, yeah, it looks like it's going to get bad, and yeah, they might close roads and they might close the airport. And by the way, and my question was, are they just going to cancel class anyway? Because I get the emails from the undergrad and the grad campus in Portland, and with any kind of inclement weather, they just cancel class. And so what I was really getting at was, I really don't want to travel in the winter to Portland only to spend Monday hanging out in your living room because they canceled class and then try to fly back Tuesday. And it was somewhere in there when I was telling my wife about the situation where she just said, well, just make it an adventure. You'll have a story to tell on Sunday. That was the second line, which turns out might have been true. So I went to bed, I'd packed my bag, I hadn't decided whether or not I was going, and then Sunday morning happened, of course, and I don't know what transpired, but I left church going, okay, I'm going. So I guess that's a good sign. Maybe there was some courageous encounter there. And I got home, and my bag was already packed, but I use my backpack every day, and it's my carry-on in the airplane, and I don't know if you do this thing, but like knowing that my backpack was going through airplane security, the last thing I needed to do before I packed was check my bag for narcotics. Right? Like, I don't use narcotics, I don't own a handgun, I don't have a switchblade, but do you do that thing where you're like, I gotta make sure there's not cocaine in my backpack because, does anybody else do that? Like, you just freak out? I always tell people, like, I could get a DUI sober because I just get so nervous when I get pulled over. Like, I don't have any drugs in here, but I think you might find some if you search, that kind of thing. So I did the backpack thing and made sure that there weren't any narcotics in the backpack. And then my wife handed me, I don't think she was in the band that morning, so she had made lunch, and it was soup and grilled cheese, and I sat on the couch, and I no sooner had I sat down that my phone buzzed. And of course, I'm all kinds of freaked out and catastrophizing and looking for an excuse to not get in the airplane, so I stood up, and I pulled my phone out of my back pocket, and I looked at it, and it was a simple message, really. It said, your flight is now boarding. Which, you need to understand, like, I'm the guy who gets to the airport 2.5 hours before the flight leaves, and that's Helena. Like, I don't like to be in a hurry, so I'm looking at the Delta app, and I still don't understand what had happened, because again, like, when I fly out of Portland, I always take the 6 o'clock flight because I want backup plans, and I leave John's house at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm usually staring at my gate at 3:40. It's like me and the guy with the mop, like, staring at the gate. So I got this message that says, your flight is now boarding. And so, there's panic, and I say goodbye to the boys as I'm running out the door, and Teresa grabs her keys, and we run out to the car, and she drives like a maniac to the airport, and the roads are icy, and the whole time I'm going, I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make it. She's like, oh, and she said again, oh, just make it an adventure. You'll be fine. Get to the airport, I could hear my name over the intercom, like she runs over to the ticket counter, he's right there. I'm running through security. Fortunately, there's nobody in security. But then, because I wasn't fully prepared, there was still a half a bottle of water in my bag because I was going to drink it as I stood in the lobby because I would have 2 hours before my flight left. So when they finally figured that out, I was like, just donate the water bottle. Someone somewhere is making a lot of money on like water bottles from the airport. Anyway, get through, run onto the airplane, sit on the airplane, and then the de-icing process started, and it took forever. And I'm like looking when my flight leaves, looking at the time, going, yep, it's going to happen. I'm going to spend the whole weekend at the Mormon Temple in Salt Lake City. Like, that's all I'm going to do all week long. Finally, the airplane gets on the runway, takes off, and I'm not kidding. No sooner did the wheels leave the ground, and I had the most horrifying thought ever. Because I use my passport when I go through airplane security, because again, I'm not an Enneagram 6, but I'm a catastrophizer, and so I want to have a backup plan. So I use my passport to get through security, and I always leave it in my backpack. And the thought that occurred to me, the wheels had barely left the runway, and a thought occurred to me, oh no, my wallet is on the bookshelf at home. Which, I mean, how much cash do you carry around with you in the back pocket of your Levi's jeans? And so there was this moment where I couldn't even, it was like when you cut your finger with a kitchen knife, you know, like I can't look, and you just do this thing. Like I knew if I had it, because I know that when I get home, I put my keys in my wallet on top of the bookshelf. I knew I didn't have my keys because I knew I didn't need them. And so I instantly knew if I have my wallet, it's in these pockets. But I'm like sitting there, like I don't want to find out because I don't know how to get in the fetal position on an airplane, but that's what I'll be in if I find out it's not in there. And it felt like days. I think it was probably just seconds, and boom, it was there. And everything went fine, and class didn't get canceled, and so on and so forth. But here's the question, and listen, I don't know how you interact with January and whether you're someone who loves New Year's resolutions or you're someone who mocks your spouse and their New Year's resolutions. It seems like, we all have different rhythms here, and I think that's great. But here's the question that I just really want to spend the next few weeks on. To me, it feels appropriate to where we're at as a community together. It feels appropriate to the calendar and the year. And probably there's some situation in your life that this is helpful as you move into 2020. But the question that I know I'm constantly bumping up against with all things God is God's primary will for me to keep me safe and comfortable? And call it elementary, but because I so want to kind of just create conversation around this idea. It strikes me that in all things theology, like is God's primary desire for you your comfort? And if that's the only question that you ask for the next month, from my perspective, that's a great thing. I actually think I started following God because my operating assumption was, well, if you follow God, then like everything bad goes away. Is that it? Or is God's primary value to use you? That you would be useful? And if we allow that there's a false dichotomy forming here, right? Because I don't think anybody believes that God's only value for you is comfort, and probably nobody believes that his only value is adventure, because then you would die every day and you're not a cat. But if we allow that it's a continuum, and I don't expect you to have a final answer now. You probably have a disposition right now. You certainly do. And my hope is that we can help you and encourage you to think about it and process it, and maybe it's different in a few weeks. But I guess my question would be, on this continuum, like, where do you think God hangs out? Where do you think God dwells? And is it possible that where God dwells and where we dwell, where God dwells and we think he dwells, are different things? And this is where I think Tolkien's work is genius. Listen, I'm not a Tolkien scholar. I've never read Lord of the Rings. I've tried a few times. I get stuck in about page 120 every time. I do read The Hobbit. I think I've read The Hobbit 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years, and it's actually because of this very theme. There's something in the story that I think Tolkien has his finger on as it relates to the human experience. And there's people in this room, you may be one of them, who have a better grasp of his overall theology and his worldview. But I think there's a narrative thread that actually he can help us with. Turn your attention to the screen. We've got a cut from the movie series that came out.
Good morning.
What do you mean? Do you mean to wish me a good morning, or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not?
Or perhaps you mean to say that you feel good on this particular morning. Or are you simply stating that this is a morning to be good on?
All of them at once, I suppose. Can I help you?
That remains to be seen. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
An adventure? No, I don't imagine anyone west of Ree would have much interest in adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. Good morning.
To think that I should have lived to be good morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I were selling buttons at the door.
Beg your pardon?
You've changed, and not entirely for the better, Bilbo Baggins.
I'm sorry, do I know you?
Well, you know my name, although you don't remember I belong to it. I'm Gandalf. And Gandalf means... me.
Not Gandalf, the wandering wizard who made such excellent fireworks. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. No idea you were still in business.
And where else should I be?
Well,
Well, I'm pleased to find you remember something about me. Even if it's only my fireworks. Yes. Well, that's decided. It'll be very good for you. And most amusing for me. I shall inform the others.
inform the who? What? No. Wait. We do not want any adventures here. Thank you. Not today. No. I suggest you try over the hill or across the water. Good morning.
So here's my question. What if Tolkien's right? Because as I understand what he's trying to say in this story, a big piece of it is that Bilbo comes from a family, from a line that lives among a bunch of people who genuinely and generally just play it safe, but that he's of a different ilk, or at least that's his heritage. And it seems like what he's observing is you've cashed it in, or you phoned it in. You've traded the adventure for the safety of the Shire. And this is the part where Tolkien's story, actually, I've made a habit whenever I'm moving into a season of discomfort, like I just start reading The Hobbit, because I think there's something to what he's saying, which is generally this idea that you're made for so much more than bubble wrap and safety. And I hope it has some credibility that it's me saying this, not the adventurous type. And I think this is the question that we have to ask, though. What if he's right? What if this is the way God works? I mean, think of the narrative arc of the story. God in the opening pages creating animals and birds and animals and this incredible creation. And I don't understand God's relationship with control in its entirety, but it sure seems in those opening pages, God suspends a lot of control in the name of what? This grand adventure with who? With people. And to me, I just imagine God with his arms over Adam and Eve's shoulders going, look at this, and I don't even know where this thing goes, and I'm not sure how it's all going to work, but this is going to be awesome. And then consider the arc of the story. Every time things go bad, it seems like there's this movement towards control and safety and comfort. And every time things swing back in the direction of God's kingdom, it's a guy like Abram and his wife Sarai going, okay, God, we'll leave here, and we'll head off into this unknown place. There's this iconic story that you may or may not be familiar with in the book of Numbers. I got a new Bible for Christmas too, by the way, which is much bigger than my last one, but I was overdue to change translations, and my eyes hurt when I go from this to this. So there's this story in Numbers, and it's a little bit iconic. You may have familiarity with it, but there's this point in Israel's history when after Moses leads them into the wilderness, it's time for them to go into the promised land. There's the next stage of the adventure. And so God instructs Moses, hey, send some spies into the land and just scout it out. See what's going on there. See what we're up against. And here's this account of when the spies come back. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land, and they told them, we came to the land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of the Negeb, the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan. In other words, it's not going to be easy. In other words, we think God is calling us to this, but this looks freaky. And then Caleb steps in, one of the other spies who has a little bit different perspective. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we. So they brought to the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great size. What if there's this single central theme to the narrative arc of the text, and it's this, that God invites us into the unknown, into risk, into where our control isn't what we'd hoped it would be. And we are constantly making decisions about whether or not we'll follow God there. I mean, over and over again, there's this theme. It comes up again in Jesus' life. There's this great story of a guy named John the Baptist. And John was Jesus' cousin, as I understand it, and he was this great leader. And we talked, heading up towards Christmas, how John was very quick to point people to follow Jesus, like he's the guy. I'm just like the precursor to the guy. Some of his best disciples changed schools and went and started studying under Jesus. And yet John the Baptist constantly had himself in trouble with the Herods. He had a way of, he was just that guy who said it the way he saw it. And there was this relationship that he called out, and that got him thrown in jail. And it doesn't seem like that was the first time. But this time, John got the sense like, this isn't going the way, I mean, usually it's they bring me into jail and they starve me for a couple days, and then they let me go and tell me not to do it again. But that's not happening this time. And so John is getting nervous, and John sends some of his disciples to Jesus to ask Jesus, hey, are you the one? And the background is, if God sent me on this adventure, then the adventure has a happy ending. And so go find out if he's really God. And in Matthew 11, this story comes up, and here's the interaction. So they come to Jesus, they say, okay, John's wondering, are you really the Messiah? And Jesus says, go tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. In other words, I'm the Messiah, and I'm doing everything that John knows the Messiah will do. And then Jesus says this, and blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. I think the NIV goes a little bit further and says, who doesn't fall away on a part as a result of me. In other words, you know what Jesus is saying here? I wouldn't have either if it wasn't for Bible scholars. What they tell us is that the context of what's going on here is Jesus is saying, go tell John, yes, I'm the Messiah, and no, you're not going to get out of prison alive. And that's where the rub is, isn't it? If God's going to call us on the adventure, then the adventure's got to have a happy ending. And some of you know better than I, it doesn't always work that way. I mean, there is the adventure that we get to go on because we choose it, right? Like there's these seasons of life where we're healthy, where we're successful, where we're young. There's these seasons of life where we stand at these proverbial crossroads and we get to make these massive decisions about what school we're going to go to or what relationships we're going to pursue or what vocation we're going to go after. There are these times where we have the luxury of choice. And I think, like Bilbo, we're faced with having to make the choice. And it sure seems that we live in a culture that is just paralyzed by anxiety, but I have to wonder if part of it is we are addicted to safety and comfort. But there's also seasons of life, and this is the season that John is in, and this might be the season you're in, where, quite frankly, you don't get the luxury of choice. It's thrust upon you. Like, you have cancer. That relationship occurred. Your marriage is in this situation. That person did, in fact, die. The business is failing. Your health is failing. And I wonder if in those instances where some of my theology that just wants a God who makes everything work out in the end, I wonder if we've created ourselves a bit of a quandary. And that really, oftentimes, the choice we have isn't adventure or no adventure. The adventure's happening. The lack of control, the suspense, you don't know the way this thing's going to end, that's your reality. But the option that we get, and this is why I pick up The Hobbit when I'm in this season of life, whether it's I'm flying to Portland and that's a thing of discomfort for me, as trivial as it sounds, or something else. The option we get is whether or not we live from a mindset of a God. And again, I don't know what Tolkien was doing with Gandalf and how close the parallels are. I don't know all that stuff. You can nerd out in your book groups. But the reminder that God frequently shows up in our life and offers to take our hand and lead us not necessarily into comfort and safety, but into meaning and purpose. You know, there's a guy named Paul who he had so much desire for these people. And there's this one people that he's writing a letter to. They live in this town that was insignificant in its day. And purportedly, Paul wrote this letter to them from prison. And listen to what Paul said to them. He says, for this reason, and this is you've responded to God. For this reason, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. So the question that we can ask is, what does Paul want for these people? So that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him as you bear fruit in every good work and as you grow in the knowledge of God. So let's stop there for a second. What is God hoping for these people? Excuse me, what is Paul hoping for? Well, he wants them to grow in their relationship with God. He wants them to grow in their knowledge of God. If you stare at it a little bit longer, you start seeing he wants them to grow in their understanding of their moral compass. Also, easily forgotten, so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, and as you bear fruit in every good work. In other words, this is like Genesis 1 stuff. And many commentators say Paul is purposely bringing the story back to Genesis 1, the God with arms over the people's shoulder who goes, look at this. We get to be a part of this together. Paul wants for them effectiveness, fruitfulness, purpose. And then watch what follows. This is so subtle, but this popped off the page for me recently. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power, and may you be prepared to endure everything with patience while joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. Question, what assumption is Paul making about his hopes for them? If Paul wants the people to grow, what assumption is he operating on comes with that desire? It's an interesting, to me what's clear is Paul's going, well, okay, if you're going to get there, if you're going to live a life of meaning, if you're going to live a life of purpose, if you're going to be fruitful, then you're going to need a strength that's greater than what you have within yourself. Why? Because you're going to face a situation that's bigger and different and unexpected and outside of your control. Isn't it interesting, I guess what I'm getting at here, that Paul's theology assumes that spiritual growth is the result of difficulty. What's the assumed story that we tell ourselves about God? If you were to ask yourself, where do you expect to meet God? Where on the continuum? One other thing real quickly. I know there's lots of scripture this morning. In James, there's this weird thing that happens in James. And I don't have slides for this, but there's this weird thing, and we're going to talk more about this in a couple weeks. But James starts his letter by saying, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Because the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance, when it's mature and complete, it makes your faith mature and complete, and you lack nothing. Which is just I hate that verse, unless you're suffering. And then you're like, okay, there's some hope in this verse. And then he shifts to, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, because God gives generously to all who ask. And then he starts talking about, but if you ask and you doubt, well, then don't do that, because then you're like waves tossed by the sea, and God's not going to respond to that. And I've always read that going like, so is James like the author of Proverbs who's jumping from ideas to idea to idea, like very, very quickly? But something was brought to my attention, actually through this study Bible real recently. What they pointed out is that perhaps what's going on in James is that James is writing to a community who's going through trials. That much is clear. But more than that, what these people want is wisdom. They want to be spiritual authorities. They want to live lives that are fruitful. And so they're appealing to the Solomon story. Because what's the Solomon story? Solomon, the second king, third king of Israel, decided, God said to him, Solomon, ask me for anything, I'll give it to you. And Solomon says, I want wisdom. And so boom, voila, like Aladdin, Solomon's wise, and he's this incredibly wise person. Never mind that lots of his decisions are horrific, but he's nonetheless considered the wisest person until Jesus in the text. And what some people say is going on here is that these people James is writing to, they're appealing to the Solomon story, and what James is saying is sometimes it happens that way. Like sometimes you become healthy and a spiritual giant and all these things because everything just works out. But what James is saying to them, perhaps, is if you ask God for wisdom, then expect an adventure. If you ask God for wisdom, expect some difficult stuff, because that's how God does wisdom. So here's my question. Where do you expect to meet God? Like some of you maybe are in this situation, and again, and great on you if this is where you're at. You're young, you're healthy, you're successful, you got all these things going for you, and you are standing at this proverbial fork in the road. You get to decide, am I going to do this or this or this? And the options seem numerous, but maybe there is a conversation about the one that you sense God is calling you to. Some of you, you're in this almost opposite spot. You didn't get to pick the adventure. It's landed on your plate. What you get to choose is whether or not you walk through that with God. Whether or not you trust, not that God gave you the cancer, not that God arranged this, that's horrible theology in my opinion, but that it's not bigger than God. And maybe for some of you, and I think this is where I've spent the majority of my life, if I'm being honest, you're so close to the idea of adventure that God's stopped asking. And for you, it's not like there's this present circumstance where you get to make a decision, or there's this present suffering where you get to make a decision. Maybe for you, it's just this more general like, okay, God, I'm going to stop clenching. I'm going to stop knocking on wood. Some of you are like, Adam, go knock on some wood. You're about to get hosed, right? Because you keep saying all this stuff like you got to learn through suffering. Maybe for some of you, it's just a loosening of a grip and going, okay, God, I do want to be fruitful. I do want to be useful. And I'll take whatever you give me in the process. I'd like to pray. God, thank you for this time and these people and this chance. God, I know that some of the people in this room are, frankly, they're suffering. There's a marriage situation, there's a health situation, there's a financial situation, and God, we don't ever want to just, we don't ever just want to put like rose-colored lenses on and see things in ways that don't honor the situation. But God, we do know that the most powerful thing you've given us is our minds and our perspectives and our attitudes, and then we connect with you there first. God, for others, they're students and people who are standing at these awesome crossroads where they get to make some really exciting decisions, we pray that you'd give them courage. And God, for people like myself who just generally go through life assuming that adventures are terrible things that make you late for breakfast, would you give us the courage to want fruitfulness more than the comforts of what it means to be an American in 2020? Amen.
If you would like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook and Instagram.